The member from Hennepin, Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I have to say, it's been a little frustrating to hear some of the conversations that we're having during this time. The fact is that most of us in this body are completely insulated from the economic realities that working people in our communities are facing right now. All of us are impacted by the pandemic. We use Zoom to do a lot of our work, which is kind of a pain. Many of us are balancing caring for babies while childcare is limited, or we have our kids doing distance learning, and it's hard to balance everything. A lot of our businesses have suffered and have lost revenue, lost support for our families. It's hard not to see loved ones and to gather, and it's hard for our kids to be missing cherished activities and milestones that we enjoyed. The impacts of loneliness are real and are not to be diminished. COVID is impacting us all. But do any of us in this body have an eviction hanging over our head? Have any of us joined the tens of thousands of Minnesotans who have sat in lines to get emergency food assistance? Are any of us facing our unemployment running out on December 27th? Have any of us had to make the difficult choice between exposing ourselves to a deadly virus and putting food on the table for our family? All of us in this room have a paycheck coming in right now. In fact, some in this chamber are even making money on investments in a stock market that's being artificially propped up by public dollars and falsely held up by some as an indication of the health of our economy. And some in this body are even benefiting from the type of government support for our small businesses that they themselves have voted against for their fellow Minnesotans who own businesses. And even in light of more than 100,000 Minnesotans on the verge of losing their final lifeline, unemployment, Representatives Mahoney and Noor had to fight for it. Emergency food assistance, emergency rental assistance, childcare assistance. These are the basic things that we're fighting for right now. In the richest country in the world, while billionaires in our country have extracted $1 trillion in wealth since the beginning of the pandemic. So maybe I shouldn't be surprised that people in this chamber and the chamber across the hall who put the interests of the wealthy and corporations above the legitimate and urgent needs of Minnesotans who are struggling, I shouldn't be surprised, but I am. Because I don't actually believe that anyone in this work actively wants Minnesotans to suffer. And because I believe in our capacity not to operate and legislate from narrow self-interest or grievance, but from an expansive place of empathy and compassion, I believe we can do better. Right now, as we speak, across the state of Minnesota, there are more than 2,500 people experiencing homelessness who are elderly or otherwise medically vulnerable and susceptible to COVID complications, who are being housed in safe isolation units that are funded by CARES Act dollars. This funding runs out just a couple days after Christmas. When I drive home tonight to sleep in my warm bed, in my warm house, I'll drive by Martin Luther King Jr. Park on 40th and Nicollet in South Minneapolis, where there are still people sleeping in tents, even in the 10-degree weather, mostly Black and Indigenous Minnesotans who disproportionately experience unsheltered homelessness when compared to white Minnesotans. These folks aren't part of the 2,500 people we're keeping safe during this extraordinary crisis, but there's nowhere for those 2,500 to go. There's no shelter capacity for them. We have no place for people to go other than a park in the middle of the winter. To continue to house these human beings, these people who are precious and valuable, all of whom are someone's child, someone's loved one, to house them through the coldest part of the Minnesota winter, from Christmas through the end of February, will cost $9 million. $9 million out of a $48.3 billion budget. We were told earlier about how important it is to always consider how we will pay for it. And we hear this a lot. How will you pay for it? Curiously, though, we're only asked to think about how we'll pay for things that benefit working people or those in our communities going through a hard time, people who are suffering. We are never asked to consider how we'll pay for the many giveaways to big business and the rich that litter our statutes and especially our tax code. Interestingly, I've never heard anyone ask how we'll pay for the $2 million that subsidize the purchase of gold bullion, or the $14 million we spend subsidizing stadium suites, or the $32 million that we spend each biennium to subsidize private golf courses, ski resorts, and archery and gun ranges. But the Senate said no to $9 million to house our elderly and medically vulnerable neighbors from Christmas through the end of February. I don't speak a ton on the floor. I think this is maybe like the third time that I've risen to address the entire body during this term. And each time I have appealed to you to see the humanity in the people we work for, but whose experience differs from ours or from yours. Previously, we were talking about undocumented immigrants or business owners in Minneapolis and St. Paul who are impacted. And now we're talking about medically vulnerable people who are experiencing homelessness in our communities. So many of the problems in our world and so many of the frustrations of this place for me, I believe can be boiled down to a failure of our compassionate imagination. It's hard sometimes for us to put ourselves in another person's shoes, but that's precisely the compassion and care that all of our religious and ethical systems call us to. And it's the compassion and care that this moment calls us to. Thank you, Madam Speaker.